12-year-old Chris pushed on the pedals of his bicycle with all his might, trying not to think about leaving his hometown forever. The boy intended to get to Chicago from the suburbs, where he lived with his mother all his life. Unfortunately, after Amanda Garrison died of pneumonia 6 months ago, Chris's life became simply unbearable. It was due to the fact that after his mother's death, the poor orphan was taken in by his Aunt Rebecca, who couldn't stand him and considered him a freeloader. Moreover, having moved into the house of her late sister with her 2 sons, Rebecca Parker immediately established her own rules in it. From the first day, the cousins hated Chris, whom they considered to be a little loser. Therefore, tired of being constantly bullied by Harry and Floyd, the boy decided to escape to Chicago, which he had been dreaming of for several weeks. Chris pedaled hard, intending to get to the city before dark. Countless drivers passed the boy, but none of them were interested in the child or his long and difficult journey. Finally, Chris reached the city. Having turned onto a quiet street, he stopped to take a breath. The boy didn't want to go downtown where the traffic was much heavier and he could easily get hit by a car. Suddenly, Chris's attention was attracted by some strange noise behind them, which vaguely resembled some kind of chewing. The boy sharply turned around and was surprised to see an old man sitting on a bench. The man's clothes were old and dirty, which gave him away as a homeless person, of which there were many in any big city. There was a paper bag next to the old man, and once in a while he took some kind of pastry out of it and ate it soundly. Seeing the man eat, Chris realized how hungry he was, and his mouth instantly filled with saliva. The fact was that it had already been several hours since the boy ran away, and in all that time he had nothing but water. Catching Chris's hungry look, the homeless man grunted and said, "What's up, kid? You hungry? Here, help yourself. There's enough for 2." Chris didn't need a repeat invitation, and soon he was already devouring the hot pastry, kindly offered to him by the old man. As it turned out a little later, the old man's name was Thomas Price, and he'd been living in an abandoned house on the corner of Park Street for several years. Upon learning that Chris had run away from home, the homeless man shook his head in disapproval, but refrained from further comment. Mr. Price understood the boy who ran away from a bad home like no one else. "If you want to, you can spend the night with me. There's enough space in the house. But I have to warn you, this neighborhood can get very loud. There are bikers living next door. But I'm already used to it, so the noise of motorcycles doesn't bother me anymore," said the old man, crumbling up the now empty paper bag. Chris gladly jumped at his offer, and an hour later, he was already lying on an old bed, which Mr. Price kindly provided for him, while he settled down on an old creaking sofa. In less than 5 minutes, the boy was already snoring softly, his cheeks buried into the pillow. Chris could no longer fight the fatigue caused by the long journey, and only his sore calves didn't let him forget about the long and hard day he had. The next morning, the boy woke up to the gentle rays of the sun penetrating through the loosely curtained window of his bedroom. Mr. Price was already on his feet and standing by the battered electric stove, was preparing a simple breakfast, a couple of eggs and a piece of bacon. Chris sniffled and smiled. He certainly liked this life. Sure, Mr. Price's home didn't exactly look like a dream house, but it was still a home. And the best part was that no one bullied Chris there and called him lazy or a freeloader. Thomas Price turned out to be a good man who read books to Chris and gently forced the boy to study writing and mathematics. The old man understood that Chris was forced to start living as an adult now, and being illiterate in the adult world would greatly complicate things for Chris. Mr. Price also introduced the boy to Patrick Morgan, who was in charge of the biker club. The man was dressed in a leather jacket and pants, and the first thing he did was show the boy his Harley Davidson. "Wow, can I have a ride?" Chris asked admiringly. "Of course you can. Just grow up for a start, and then you're welcome to try it," Patrick said with a smile. He liked to watch the boy, who seemed fascinated by the bikers' free life on the road and the earth-shattering roar of the engines. To the delight of Mr. Price, Chris became a frequent guest of the biker club, which was run by Patrick Morgan. Even more delighted he was by the fact that the boy didn't just watch the bikers work on their bikes, but also got involved in the process as much as he could. Over time, Chris learned so much about engines and brands of motorcycles that he was no worse than a real mechanic. "We have a future mechanic among us. Mark my words, this boy will make something of himself," said Mr. Price, giving Patrick Morgan a friendly wink. A few years flew by quickly. During this time, little and frail Chris turned into a tall, handsome young man whose pride was his shabby jeans and a leather jacket with many zippers and rivets. Unfortunately, as Chris entered adulthood, Mr. Price fell seriously ill after having recently celebrated his 70th birthday. Sadly, multiple chronic diseases have exhausted the body of the old man, who spent a significant part of his life on the street. Thomas Price passed away quietly in his sleep. That day, a beautiful rainbow appeared in the sky after a long and heavy rain. Losing the only person who cared about him was very hard for Chris. On top of that, Patrick Morgan and the rest of the bikers decided to disband the bikers club. "We got cornered, Chris. The local authorities, they didn't leave us a chance. And our problems with the law. I'll go back to my homeland in Idaho. It's quiet and peaceful there, but I want to give you something before I go. Take my bike. It's yours now," said Patrick Morgan and handed the keys over to the young man. After that, the two men shared a hug and promised to see each other again in the future. Now riding Patrick's Harley on the night streets of Chicago, Chris felt like a night wolf living his lonely life. Since the young man had nowhere else to go, he still lived in the old shack, inherited from the late Mr. Price. One day, as he was riding by the river, Chris witnessed a terrible accident, which ended with one of the cars ramming the guardrails and getting stuck, hovering over the river. The accidental witnesses of the tragic accident only shrugged their shoulders and waited for the rescue services to arrive. They told Chris that the driver was still in the Ford that was hovering over the river. Having taken a hammer out of the glove compartment, the young man resolutely approached the car and broke the rear window with a few strong blows. Then he carefully climbed inside the car. There he saw a scared young woman who turned out to be the driver of the ill-fated Ford. She was crying and didn't know what to do. "Come on, grab my hand, quickly, or we'll both fall into the river," Chris ordered in a tone that brooked no objections. Fortunately, the man didn't have to say it twice, as the stranger immediately complied with his request. It took Chris a lot of strength and effort to pull the woman out and take her a few yards away from the dangerous place. At that exact moment, the car swayed menacingly and fell into the river. Chris's bravery caused a storm of loud applause from the involuntary audience, who all got to witness the entire incident. "How are you? Are you okay? Let's get out of here before the police and reporters arrive. Just hold on tight," said Chris and started the engine of his motorcycle. In less than a couple of minutes, the young people were already on their way downtown, where it was easy to get lost in heavy traffic. Meanwhile, Chris enjoyed feeling the young woman's hands hugging him tightly around his waist. As it turned out a little later, the name of the stranger he rescued was Samantha Martinez, and her parents were wealthy business people. Shortly before that fateful morning, her father gave her the brand new Ford to celebrate her upcoming birthday. Unfortunately, that car was difficult to handle, and thus, having gone over the speed limit, Samantha crashed it. "Yeah, you still got lucky though. You didn't even get a scratch. It could have ended so much worse." Chris shared his thoughts. "I don't really think there's anything lucky about this situation. Now I'll have to tell my father what happened, and he's very strict," Samantha replied with a sad sigh. Chris felt a wave of sympathy for the woman standing in front of him. Samantha was a good-looking young woman with beautiful blue eyes, which reminded Chris of his late mother. Despite everything that happened earlier, the young people spent the rest of the day together, chatting about everything in the world and feeling strong mutual sympathy. When it started getting dark, Chris drove Samantha home. Having mustered up the courage and overcome his timid nature, the young man asked to see Samantha again the next day. Of course, the young people had no way of knowing that the memorable encounter would lay the foundation of their future relationship, which would fill their lives with love and tenderness. Seeing each other every day, Chris and Samantha grew very attached to one another in just a matter of days. Unfortunately, Donald Martinez did not share his daughter's enthusiasm about this relationship and only thought about how to get rid of her biker boyfriend as soon as possible. "Chris is no match for you, daughter. He's probably a good guy, but I've already found a better fit for you from our social circle," the businessman once said, getting up from the dinner table. "But Dad, I love Chris, and I don't want to be with anyone else," Samantha retorted, touching her lips. Unfortunately, the young woman didn't take into account her father's determination. The man decided to break them up no matter what. Thus, Donald Martinez placed his daughter under house arrest and told Chris that she was getting married. Of course, the young man was indignant and tried to defend his rights, but the businessman's bodyguards quickly threw him out on the street. Not knowing what to do, Chris literally couldn't find a place for himself. After that, staying in Chicago was too painful for Chris, since everything reminded him of Samantha. Tired of feeling sad all the time, the young man packed up and went to his hometown, where he ran away from many years ago. Poor Chris was in for an unfortunate surprise. The house of his late mother was in a rather deplorable state. Apparently, no one did any work on the house in all those years. Chris realized that his late mother was probably the last person who repaired anything around that place. But when Chris cautiously opened the door, an aged Aunt Rebecca came out to greet him. She was blindly squinting, trying to make out who came to visit her. "Chris, is it you, my boy?" an elderly woman asked in a trembling voice. Unable to contain his feelings, Chris hugged Aunt Rebecca, trying not to look into the old woman's eyes, which were full of guilt. As it turned out, her sons Harry and Floyd stepped out on a slippery slope and were living a life of crime. The logical result of their dangerous craft was a sentence for armed robbery, which the unbearable duo was already serving in the state county jail for 3 years. Listening to his aunt's story, Chris was surprised that he didn't feel any resentment towards her. On the contrary, the young man was very understanding and even offered to help her repair the house. One day, as he was working on the fence, Chris heard a painfully familiar woman's voice. "Hi, darling. So that's where you ran off to." Surprised, Chris turned around and saw Samantha Martinez standing in front of him. "What are you doing here? Did you run away? But what about your wedding and your father?" the young man asked incredulously. "No, I didn't run away, although I really wanted to. The truth is that I'm pregnant, Chris, and I told my father about it. He understood and changed his mind about our relationship. So here I am," Samantha said, looking down in embarrassment. Having heard his beloved out, Chris couldn't contain his happiness. He picked Samantha up and swirled her around the yard like a feather. Laughing merrily, Samantha Martinez even made Aunt Rebecca laugh, who immediately realized that something very good had just happened in her nephew's life. Meanwhile, Chris couldn't stop spinning Samantha, holding her close. The young man was beyond happy, realizing that in 7 or 8 months, he'd become a father and the head of the family. Moreover, the young man didn't know it yet, but his future father-in-law had given the young couple a car dealership as a gift. And thus, Chris would soon turn from a simple biker into a millionaire. But in the meantime, Chris simply enjoyed the nice moment, which changed his life in an instant. He now had true love and a real family.